Good evening. This is Joe Ford with Ford Family Farms. It is December 8th, 2024, and I've had a number of requests this week for information on how to go about purchasing a half or a whole hog. How does that processing work? How do you fill out a cut sheet? How do you determine what the cost is going to be when deciding whether you want to make the investment or not? And after about the third person asked me these questions, I thought, let's put a video together and share that out with everybody. So there are a number of content creators on YouTube that have much more detailed content that breaks every one of these items down. But I'm going to give a general overview. Feel free to ask questions in the comments. And yeah, let's get started. So we have a long list of topics today. And these are the things that have been consistently asked just in the last week, but definitely over the last couple of years. We're going to run through how to find a producer. Obviously, there are small farms and ranchers all over the United States, and we're just going to use the generic term producer, tell you how to connect with them, what laws and restrictions they have to work within so you understand why we do what we do. We're going to talk about deposits, scams, and how those overlap sometimes. We'll talk about pricing options when you're purchasing an animal. We'll take you through the processing day, the timelines, payments, cut sheets, and price sheets. If you've never heard those terms, don't worry, I'm going to break it down real easy for you. We'll talk about expected yields, how much meat you should expect to get from these animals, and then probably the thing that everybody wants to know the most is, what is it going to cost? How does that cost get broken down? What's the average price per pound for these animals at the end of the processing? And I call it geek out time, because when I start getting into a spreadsheet and working with data, I can get lost. So I'm going to try my best to keep this within about a 30-minute session. If you are wanting to skip everything else and just look at the payment piece, feel free to fast forward to the end. But if this is new to you, or if you've only been through it once or twice, you may find some useful content here. So let's get started, and let's see if we can knock this out within 30 minutes or less. Let's talk about how do you find producers. Producers are all over the country, and they could have anything from meats to handmade products, produce, vegetables, and honey, anything in between. And so there's a number of ways you can find somebody in your area. Farmers markets are a great place to find producers. Farmers markets are in just about every town in the United States, and not all of them are very big, but look around, do a Google search. I guarantee you'll find one within an hour of where you are. Word of mouth is a great option. You want to know that where you go, you're going to have a quality product with somebody and you'll be working with somebody that has been tried and tested by somebody that you know and you respect their opinion. So ask your friends, ask your family. There's a chance that one of them have already engaged with a producer of some sort, and you might get a good referral from there. Producers are all over social media. It's tough to get out there and break into the market. A lot of people, again, don't even know we exist in some areas. Some other areas it's very saturated, but there are groups on Facebook for that. If you type in pork producer, hog producer, beef producer, freezer beef, packaged beef, box beef, any of these terms will bring you to a producer, just a generic Google search. So take a look on social media. Again, as with below with the websites and apps, always pay very close attention to the location of that producer. Anytime you find a local producer, it's somebody that is engaged and committed to that community. It's somebody that's going to care about the customers because they are their friends and neighbors. And to always pay attention to location when you're on the social media platforms or looking through various websites and apps. There's a number of farm to table directories out there that will just list producers that have registered. There's so many small areas. There's no one central area for that. So just look around, be careful where you go, and just do a little due diligence on those locations. Let's talk about some of the laws and restrictions when it comes to custom beef, custom pork, any kind of protein. Now, I'm located in the state of Texas, so I'm going to refer to Texas state laws and regulations. I'm not going to go through every single one. There's always more regulations than anybody ever wants to hear about. But I'm going to hit on a couple of the big ones that explains the process we go through and why we go through it. So in the state of Texas, a producer has to sell you a live animal. The sale has to happen when the animal is live. And what they'll do is you and the producer, you and I, for example, will come to an agreement on a price. We will make the decision on when to process that. Oftentimes that date's already set. We'll talk about that later. And that producer will drop them off at a processor of their choosing or of your choosing, depending on what you negotiate with that producer. And so they are not allowed to process on site at the farm and sell you cuts of meat or anything of that nature. Now, there are some exceptions. On farm, I can process up to 10,000 chickens. You can come to my farm, I can sell you a chicken. That's not a problem. I can help you if you buy the animal and that transaction takes place first. I could help you process that animal out and show you how to break down primals and things of that nature. And there are some farms that will do that. That's not something most producers do. That's not something we do. But there are some restrictions around how that process has to take place on the sale of the animal, the delivery of the animal, the processing, where and when it takes place, and the pickup of that animal. So this is a fairly standard practice. What I'm about to go through with you, it is not unique to Texas, and it can vary from producer to producer. But the general concept in most cases will be the same. Some producers will go out, have their animals processed at a USDA facility, and then they can sell you the cuts afterwards. But most of the time, if you're buying a whole or a half of an animal, this is the process you're going to go through. There's a lot of concern out there around scams and deposits, and rightly so. There are a number of scammers, especially out there on Facebook, that will say, hey, they'll throw a picture of an animal out. Got some animals for sale. They're going to process. Send me a $150 deposit, $50 deposit, something of that nature, and then you will never hear from them again. Unfortunately, that has hurt local producers because we run into issues where we have to purchase an animal or raise an animal, feed that animal, make sure that we have all the infrastructure for that animal. And we could be $1,000 more into a single animal by the time it gets to processing. And we're going through this process right now. We had a number of people that we did not collect deposits from, and now we're scrambling trying to find buyers for 2 of these animals before their processing date, just because they decided, 6 months later, nah, my freezer's full. I don't want to process. I don't want to purchase the animal anymore. So, pay attention to your farmers. Talk with them. There are a lot of ways to make sure that they are legitimate. You can have a conversation over the phone. I caution you against just having them send you pictures of video unless it's a FaceTime or some kind of other video streaming where you can actually see the animals. Most farmers and ranchers, while they are working sometimes an off-farm job and on the farm, you don't just drop by a farm anytime. But many of them will allow you to come out and take a look at the animals and see how they're being raised. And I encourage you to reach out and ask them if they're willing to do that. If they're not, it doesn't mean that they are a scammer or something's going on, but maybe they're just not set up for that, or they're very busy. But most, I think, will work with you to find a time where you can come visit the property where the animals are being kept, take a look at them, and even pick your own out if that's what you want to do. Be careful. There are scammers out there, unfortunately, that are ruining it for everybody. One of the things we're looking at doing is getting a web service set up where people can make their deposits, a little more safety and security on both ends from the payment perspective, and gives a little more legitimacy to that deposit process. But those deposits are really important to make sure the farmer's not stuck with an animal at the end of the growing season that they're not able to find a buyer for. And it helps them offset some of the cost of the feed, care and maintenance of those animals getting up to that processing date. So deposits are not necessarily a bad thing. If you go on Facebook, everybody will swear that deposits, if anybody asks for a deposit, is a scammer. That's not the case. They're just trying to minimize their risk. But pay attention, talk to your producer, um, do your due diligence, call them, talk to them, visit the farm, and see if they have a social media following where they're actually presenting more than pictures. They have videos of actual activity taking place with them and the animal, and that should give you a pretty good sense of security around any deposit that you may request. When you're working with your producer to find a price, oftentimes they have already set a price, and sometimes that's negotiable. But most of the time, that price is based off of what did it cost for them to purchase the animal and or feed and take care of that animal, and what is the profit that they need to recoup off of that animal to ensure that they can continue producing, whether it's vegetables or beef or cattle or chicken. These things cost a lot of money. There's a lot of infrastructure costs going into these, and again, we take all the risk from death, loss, and sickness, and people backing out of a purchase agreement. So those prices are typically set to keep the farmer in business or the producer in business, but it can be presented to you in a number of ways. It can be live weight. That's the animals walking around in the pen. They walk them onto a scale. That is what the animal weighs at that point in time. That is the live weight. There are some ranchers out there or producers out there that do have scales that you can do it that way. I would also caution you on that. Scales are not often calibrated. You could potentially find a scammer out there that has loaded their scale in their favor. So I typically do not recommend doing a live weight purchase unless you're keeping the animal as a breeding animal. And in that case, find a scale you like. A lot of people use cat scales at truck stops. Go weigh the animal, drop it off, and weigh the truck empty. And sometimes they're fine with that. But always, unless it's an inspected and certified scale, be a little cautious of live weight purchases. Hanging weight is most likely what you're going to encounter when you're purchasing a half or a whole animal. And hanging weight means the animal has been taken to the processor. They have been dispatched. All of the internals have been removed. And you have your what is considered a hot carcass weight hanging on a hook. It will include the head. It will include some key organs, all meat, bone, and fat. So that is what your hanging weight typically consists of. Your per animal price, some people say, you know what, this pig's $600, and I'm just going to do a flat rate on the pig. You get what you get. If you get a larger pig than their average, that works in your favor. If you get one of the smaller ones in the group, again, that price was set off of some kind of average of their animals. So if you got a smaller animal, maybe you're not getting as much for your money as another customer. But hanging weight is by and large the most common approach. And these are scales that are regularly inspected at these processors, so you can trust, especially at a USDA inspected facility, you can trust those weights more often than not. When you're deciding a price, you need to look at schedules. So if you need your animal by a certain date, again, you can't always speed up how quickly an animal grows, but you need to make sure that you're going to be able to pick up that animal from the processor when the animal is ready to be picked up. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the future. If you're asking the processor to pick it up, be prepared that they may ask for a fee. They've already gone and dropped off the animal on your behalf. That's usually included in the purchase price. But if they have to take time out of their day, drive back up there, pick up your meat, hold it in a freezer, potentially purchase a freezer to hold your animal, there could be or delivery of that animal to your residence, there will probably be an additional fee for that. And that is to be expected. That is a very costly endeavor from both a time and financial perspective. So those are things that you really should negotiate at the time of sale. When the animal is dropped off at the processor is not the right time to ask your producer, hey, when will you deliver the animal to me? because more often than not, that was not part of the original purchase agreement. When it comes down to processing day, uh, there's a pretty strict adherence to timeline from the producer and the processor relationship. And I'm going to break down what this looks like in a scenario, and we're about to do this on December 18th, so 10 days from now. We will be working with American Butchery. They're located just outside of Santo, Texas, and they have a strict schedule that we have to drop the animals off between 8 and 9 a.m. on the scheduled date of delivery. Now, to drop that animal off that morning, they typically will run all the animals through. They'll dispatch. They will remove any entrails. They'll get those hanging weights, and typically they'll be asking for a cut sheet at time of drop off, or they will be calling the customer that has purchased the animal to get that cut sheet filled out. Those hanging weights are usually presented back to the producer and or the customer within 24 to 48 hours of that processing time. So if I'm dropping them off on the 18th, I may or may not get a call by the end of the day, depending on how backed up they are. But if I haven't heard from them by about noon on the 19th, I'm going to call, ask them what the hanging weights were for those animals so that I know how to charge the customer. Now, again, 90% of the time or more, hanging weight is what determines the final cost of the animal itself. So, for example, we are selling our pigs this year or this season at $3.50 a pound hanging weight. So when we get that weight from the processor, we will call the customer and say, this is your hanging weight. We'll multiply it by 350, and that is what you owe the producer. Typically at that time, you will either pay by check, Venmo, Cash App, whatever method of payment y'all have previously agreed upon, you will go ahead and pay the producer at that time. The cut sheet that I mentioned a second ago is also turned in, and each animal will be identified by an ear tag and the customer that it goes to on a cut sheet, and that breaks down for the processor how you want that animal to be broken down. Do you want any special products or anything done there? It's at that time of drop off that they need to know, do you want for example, for beef, do you want to keep the cape or the hide? Oftentimes that's a value added product or an additional charge. But if you want that, you have to say that up front. Do you want to keep the head for these animals? There are a lot of products that are made from the head, the tongue, and various parts of the animal that oftentimes they'll just be thrown away and discarded if they are not identified in advance that the customer does in fact want those. Keep in mind, if you do want the head of the animal, those typically have to be picked up same day, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit as well. When we talk about timeline and payment, everybody wants to know, well, when will my meat be ready? When can I pick it up? When can I put it in my freezer or throw it on the grill and plan that first barbecue? So it depends on what kind of animal you have processed and what kind of value add products that you're trying to get from that animal. So if you're doing a straight primal cut, you're cutting steaks, let's just talk about beef for a second. You want steaks and ground beef. That animal is going to be ready in about a week and a half in most cases. For a beef, they'll typically hang that animal and let it age for about 7 days, and that's standard, 7 to 10 days. And then they will begin to process the remainder of the animal and break it down into what you requested on your cut sheet. Pork does not have a hanging time, so they will begin processing that down, usually within 24, 48 hours of the initial butcher time, of the initial dispatch time. That said, value add products can add time to your order. So if you're having meats cured, those take several days to do, and they tend to batch these types of items. Summer sausages, hams, bacon, even link sausage on your beef. They'll typically do that 1 or 2 days a week. They'll batch up a number of orders so they can be more efficient with their resources. and it will add potentially an additional week or week and a half to your timeline. So in general, if you're looking at dropping off from the date the animal is dropped off, you're looking at anywhere from 7 to 21 days that you're going to have to pick up that animal. You should be able to speak with the processor at that time, and they can tell you based off your cut sheet when your animal will be ready within about 72 hours. And as it gets closer, they will call you and confirm that pickup time. Customers will typically pick up their animal from the processor. They will confirm that they did receive what they expected to receive, and then they will pay the processor for their services. Those services are separate from the sale of the animal, which you've already completed with the producer. So just know that when you've paid the producer, there's still a piece of it left, and we'll break that down at the end. And that is paid directly to the processor themselves. Just a note, be prepared to pick up your meat when they tell you it's ready. There's normally a window, grace period, that they will allow you to pick up your meat, and then they'll start charging you a storage fee if it's not picked up within that window. Again, a lot of times, these folks are really good to work with. If you say, look, I'm out of town this week, can you hold it till Saturday? Maybe it's 2 days afterwards. They'll probably waive that fee for you. But just something to be aware of, and keep in mind that you need to work with the processor and or your producer if you have some limitations on when you can pick that up. So as I said in the last slide, at the time of negotiation of the sale of that animal, be prepared to talk about how are you going to actually receive that meat and when. Okay, that took longer than it should have, but let's get into the main event, and let's talk about the cut sheet first. So again, American Butchery is where who we are working with. They are a USDA inspected facility. There are also facilities called custom butchers or custom processing plants. Those are not USDA facilities. If I took an animal there, I could not resell those cuts from my farm. However, if it is USDA inspected, and it will say on the label that it is USDA inspected, I could sell cuts to my customers if I so choose, or I could take those cuts and sell them to a grocery store or a farm market store or anything else I wanted to, even a restaurant. American Butchery, this is their cut sheet. These do vary from processor to processor, but for the most part, they're fairly similar. There's a lot of core components. They could have additional things like making patties out of beef or pork. They could have things like specialty products, chorizo or something of that nature that, again, is not shown here, but it could be an option at another processor, and it even could be an option at this processor. If that is something you wanted, you don't see it on the cut sheet, be sure to ask them and say, hey, I would really like this. Can y'all do it? And a lot of times they will work with you to make that happen. Let's talk about this cut sheet. So, as I indicated, the animal owned, that would be, in this case, Ford Family Farms. They will have my number and my name. And then the processing billed to, that's going to be the customer. They're going to have the drop-off date, the ear tag date, to make sure that you are getting the animal that you paid for. And you want to make sure that you are working with a reputable processor that takes care to do that. And again, USDA facilities that cost a little bit more, there's a much greater sense of comfort for most people that they are not only getting their animal, but it was done in a clean and humane way. This is where we would indicate split carcass, and split carcass is only applicable if you're doing half of an animal. So if you said, hey, I want a half, and somebody else is getting the other half, we would have side A and side B, and we would indicate split carcass there. Then you come down into your cuts, and as you go into these cuts, you can slice and dice these things, no pun intended, a number of ways. But you have to be careful in some areas that if you choose one thing, you may not be able to choose another. And so as you're running through this, again, best to talk with the processor. They know exactly what you can and can't get out of an animal. This is what they do every day. They can tell you your hanging weight was this. This is what you should expect. But boneless pork chops or butterfly chops, you can tell them what thickness. So I could say, hey, I want my boneless pork chops 3/4 of an inch, or maybe I really like a good thick pork chop and I want an inch or an inch and a half pork chop. Just tell them. They will cut it to that thickness. You can tell them how many pieces you want per pack. So if you have a big family and you know that you're never going to cook less than 4 pork chops at a time, maybe you want to say 4 per pack. Or you say, you know what, I'm only going to pull these out when I'm doing a big barbecue. Go ahead and put 8 per pack. Great. If it's just you and your spouse or you alone and you want smaller portions, do 2 per pack. This is up to you. They will work with you. If there's any limitations, they'll talk to you about those and work through that with you. But most of the time, I tend to go with anywhere from 2 to 6 pieces of meat per package. That works well for our family. Bone-in pork chops. Now, it's one or the other in most cases, bone-in or boneless. And keep in mind, and we'll talk about some other limitations there, but see here where we have this highlighted, tenderloins are only available with boneless or butterfly chops. If you get the bone-in chops, it's again, the way the muscles are formed, you're not going to be able to do both. Baby back ribs are the same thing. If I'm getting bone-in chops, that bone is what makes up my baby back ribs. So I would not be able to get bone-in chops and baby back ribs. My personal preference, boneless pork chops, I want my ribs. I like to cook those ribs, throw them on the smoker, and that is the way I go every time. But again, it's whatever works for you and your family. We'll get moving on down. We'll see the spare ribs, the Boston butt, and the picnic roast. So spare ribs, do you want them cut in half? Do you want them whole? Same with the tenderloin and the ribs above. And in that tenderloin, those run from the shoulder of the animal all the way to the pelvis. So those can be really, really long pieces of meat. Most people are not going to cook an entire tenderloin and eat it before it goes bad unless they're cooking for a very large group. So probably recommend cutting that in half and either packaging both halves or repurposing one half for something else. All right, spare ribs. Do you like them St. Louis style? Do you not? If you don't know the difference, Google it. If you're into ribs and barbecuing, you can go down a lot of rabbit holes with different rib cuts and styles. Boston butt and your picnic roast. So these are your pork roast. And a lot of times you will see picnic roast and Boston butts used interchangeably for pulled pork. So if you're doing a long, slow cook, whether in the slow cooker or on the smoker, your pulled pork usually comes from one of these cuts. Some will do a full pork roast, but a lot of times this is also where the best opportunity for your sausage comes in. So you have to kind of figure out what is most important to you. Do you like to barbecue? Do you need a lot of breakfast sausage or other value add products? Do you like country style ribs? Those are cut from the pork butt. So I am a fan of country style ribs. A lot of people don't know what those are, but if you've never had them, maybe you give them a shot and try it out. So it's really mix and match to fit what you and your family are going to use the most of and get the most benefit from. As we move down, we'll see fresh ground pork. So there's no additional charge for those, and we'll talk about the fees here in a moment. But a chub, for those that don't know, is that round tube that you'll typically see in a grocery store. You'll see it anywhere from 1 pound to 5 or even 10 pounds when you're looking at some ground beef. So that small tube is called a chub. They have the option to do 1 pound or 2 pound, and you can determine what you want from there. You can just do ground pork if you just want it ground and you like to make pork chili, or anything of that nature, great. No additional charge, nothing else needed. Just tell them you want it ground up. However, if you do want mild, hot, maple, or Italian sausage, you need to break out how much you want. And again, these are typically made from various trimmings, the picnic and the Boston butt in most cases. So you have to, and we'll talk about that breakdown, but you need to figure out how many pounds do you really want of each of those. And if you think about it, how much bacon and sausage does your family eat on an annual basis? If you start thinking about it on a weekly basis, how much do we eat? Multiply that by 12 or 10 or 12 months or whatever, and you come up with a number that you think is realistic for your family, and figure out what may be left and turn that into maybe an Italian sausage ground, or maybe leave it as a roast. But these typically have to be done in a 10 pound or 25-pound minimum. For this particular processor, they require a 10-pound minimum to take that ground pork, mix all the seasonings, get it to the right ratio, and go ahead and package it in those chubs. There's other processors, they may require a larger amount, but for these folks, 10 pounds is all you have to do of each flavor. So you can't do 2 of each to equal 10, but for every recipe that you want, you have to have a minimum of 10 pounds for them to do that. As we go down below that, we have our bacon. So our bacon can be done a couple of different ways. Now you can do fresh bellies if you like to cook those yourself. Maybe you like to grill them or smoke them and do pork belly some other way. That's a great way. I'm probably going to do a couple of those myself this year. I've had a few recipes I've wanted to play with. But most people are probably going to go with smoked and cured. And smoked and cured that's your bacon. That is going to be smoked cured bacon ready to go, sliced to the thickness that you want, and then packaged up in the in the amounts that you want. So you would indicate whether you want a fresh belly or a smoked and cured. Now there's one belly per half. So if you want one of each, let them know. I'd like one fresh, one smoked and cured. And on the smoked and cured, I want it cut regular, thick, or extra thin. And depending on what your family uses, you might want 1 pound or 2 pounds, or you could even want 5 pounds at a time, so that you're breaking out the appropriate amount of meat every time you thaw something out to use it. If we come over to the right, we have our hams, and this is another option for ground if that's not something you're interested in. Some people just don't like ham. Great. Throw it in the ground, turn it into sausage, turn it into a roast of some other sort, and you can either get those fresh or smoked and cured. Smoked and cured is what most people are going to ask for, and most people are going to say cut them in half. These hams are very large, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Most people do not want a full ham that's smoked and cured. You're also not going to get as much smoke throughout the piece of meat if you leave it whole. So I always cut these in half, multiple hams. If I need more meat, I'll just cook multiple hams. But I feel like the product tends to be better in most cases if you cut those in half. And then you can also choose ham steaks. So maybe you say, hey, I want a half a ham, and then I want the rest in steaks. I'm a fan of ham steaks. Again, you can get those cut to whatever thickness you're looking for. So they have easy checkbox for half inch, 3/4, and 1 inch. I typically go half inch on my ham steaks. And then how many pieces per pack. And these are really big steaks. So I typically don't do more than 2 pieces per pack. But if you have a large family or you cook for large groups, 3 per pack may be more appropriate for you. And that's it. That's the general cut sheet. That breaks down the primals. That puts it into most of your value added products. And there's a few things that aren't on here that they will write in if you ask them. So if you say you want the head, well, you write that on want the head. If you say you want the fat, they'll write in keep the fat. If you say you want to keep the organs, they'll write in keep the organs. If you indicate any other special request, those things will be written on this sheet, and you should get a copy of this completed from the processor when the sheet is fully completed. and I've done this with American Butchery, so I know they do it. They will complete the sheet. They will send it to you and ask you to confirm that either in a text message or in an email. And they want you to see it, put your eyes on it, make sure it is exactly what you wanted, and then they will move forward with the processing from there. But what does this cost? Well, let's look into the price sheet and break down what the fees are. And don't get ahead of me. There's a lot of numbers here. They mean a lot of different things. In the next section, we're going to get into a Google sheet, and we will break down how these prices actually apply to your animal. But let's just go through what the different types of fees are. Explain those a little bit so they make a little more sense when we talk about them here in a moment. So your slaughter fee is $85. That is what it costs for a pork or a pig at this particular butchery. I have looked at pricing for probably 15 different butchers in the last 2 to 3 years, and I've worked with 2 different ones, and I've seen those kill fees go from anywhere from $65 up to $150. And 150 is really on the high end. Normally you'll see them in that $100 range. So anywhere from 85 to 115, that would be considered a market average slaughter fee. But you can, depending on the animal and the processor, you could potentially see something higher or lower. The processing fee per rail weight. Now this is going to go based off your hanging weight. So the rail weight processing, just to break everything down, cut your pork chops, grind your pork, and package everything up, is going to be 95 cents a pound. and that's just without doing any value add products. 95 cents a pound is what it's going to cost you. Cure and smoke, if you want to cure and smoke your hams, they'll charge you $1.25 a pound for that service. And that covers the service, the seasonings, all the time it takes. That is not an easy process, and so $1.25 a pound is not necessarily unrealistic for that service. Cured and smoked bacon, add an additional $2 a pound. If you see that note, if it's too lean, the animal may not yield bacon. That's usually for animals that are under about 200 pounds live weight. They're just not big enough to have anything worth making bacon. You turn that into sausage. But most of your producers are going to process a hog between 280 and 350. That's your normal range. I would say the majority of them are going to be that 280 to 300 range. So you should get bacon out of your pig. $2 a pound for that service. If you want breakfast sausage, they add 50 cents a pound. So, instead of 95 cents, you're looking at $1.45 a pound for all of your breakfast sausage to be made. If you want summer sausage, that's an additional $4 a pound. If you want to add jalapenos and cheese to that, 50 cents a pound. If you want link sausage, so maybe you want your Italian sausage in link, or you want brats, or you want something else. Because of the casing and the extra effort it takes, they do have an upcharge of $4 a pound. And again, these are all numbers that vary from processor to processor. If you go to a custom processor that's not USDA inspected, they very well may have a potentially lower rate. But I have also seen those rates as high as $7 a pound for the additional processing of sausage, link sausage, and summer sausage. So $4 a pound is what these guys charge. I've had the products. I'm a fan of them, and so I'm happy to go ahead and pay that rate to get the products that I've received. Again, additional charge for jalapeno and cheese. If you want to keep the fat, it's 50 cents a pound. Again, if the animal's too lean, it may not yield fat, but if you're getting a hog 280 and above, you will have some fat. And the reason they charge for this is they have to cut it, put it in, their whatever freeze vacuum seal bags, and bag it up like everything else. So there is some material and labor cost there. If you don't want it, this producer or this processor also makes their own products. And when somebody brings in a beef and they make sausage, they will add pork and pork fat to it. So anything that you don't want, they will use. It won't get thrown away, but it will be used for something else. However, that is a product you paid for. There is opportunities to turn that fat into things. If you make your own sausage at home, that's the best fat to use. Um, if you have never used lard or rendered lard, I highly recommend trying that instead of hydrogenated oils out there. It's great for cooking, great for baking, frying. We have almost exclusively gone to pork lard over the last several months just because it's so much healthier for you than a lot of those vegetable oils, peanut oils out there. If you want to retain the head, again, I spoke to that earlier. If you're going to do that, you do typically have to pick that up at the day of slaughter. That is an additional $20. There's box fees for the number of boxes. Again, if you don't want to pay the box fee, if you want to just bring a big cooler and haul it out and throw it in a cooler, they'll probably work with you on that. You don't have to do that. But I will tell you, it's typically more convenient to transfer the pork in boxes in an enclosed vehicle. If you're going to do it, say in the bed of a truck, I do recommend a cooler, and that may be a good way to eliminate that box fee. However, these pigs are fairly large, so you will need some large coolers to do that. If the USDA inspector condemns the animal, they'll charge $100. This should be paid for by the producer. If the animal is condemned, that is not your fault. The producer should pay that, and you should get a refund. Anybody that doesn't do that is definitely not a reputable producer. And if any of our animals, for whatever reason, became condemned, we would most definitely cover that fee, refund any monies paid, and ensure that we made it right. That is a very rare thing for, again, for producers that are taking care of the animals. They know what they're doing. That's a pretty rare thing, but it does happen for some animals. And then I talked to you about making sure that you pick up your beef when it's ready to be picked up. They will, once they notify you it's ready to pick up, you'll have an entire week. So they'll give you 7 days to come get that animal. And then after that, they're going to charge you, again, $5 per box per day. And a pork will typically fill anywhere from 10 to 15 boxes, depending on how you had the cuts broken down and how big the animal was. So that can add up fairly quickly. But again, if you talk to them at the time of slaughter, when you turn in your cut sheet, get an estimation of when that is. And if it just doesn't work for you, work with them. And a lot of times they will work with you as long as you do that in advance. Okay. All right. So let's go back and let's get into our Geek Out session. So we have a whole sheet to geek out on. So we talked about live weights. We talked about hanging weights. We talked about, the head, the organs, the tongue, the cape, the fat. So let's just talk about how does this animal get broken down? What is the yield um, and the percentage of the live weight that you should expect to get from that animal? And for example, we're anticipating our hogs got fairly large this year. So we are anticipating that our live weight is going to be averaging 360 an animal. Again, every single animal is different. Even if they were raised together, they're the same breed, they're from the same litter, they will all grow and yield at a different rate. But they'll all be fairly close to these general rules of thumb that are used in the industry to estimate yield. So we're going to use those general rules of thumb. We're going to go conservative on a few of these numbers so we don't get surprised in a bad way down the road. So we anticipate our animals are going to be about 360 live weight. 70% of that is typically the rule. So 70% of that live weight is going to be your hanging weight, and this is the weight you'll be charged with. So in our case, $3.50 times 252 pounds, and that is your animal weight that you will pay the producer. And then that will yield retail cuts somewhere in the 176 range. Typically 70% of live weight is your hanging weight, and roughly 70% of your hanging weight will be your retail cuts, and that's going to be your chops, your sausage, what you should expect out of that animal. Now, this weight can vary depending on whether you did a lot of bone-in cuts, because that will add weight, or bone-out cuts and all boneless, and that will reduce your weight. So if you got home and you turn the entire animal into sausage and you say, hey, this is only 140 pounds or 150 pounds, it could have been because all the things that were thrown away that normally would have been included in that weight. Again, we're going to be conservative today, so I have a little note here. We're going to use 156 pounds in retail cuts. If we have a hanging weight of 252, that's what we're going to use today. Again, additional things that are in these weights: organs, the head, tongue, fat, and we're going to take that 20 pounds that we're taking off the retail cuts, and we're going to add that to our 20 pounds. We're going to make that 20 pounds fat. Again, people ask the same thing about beef, so let's just go ahead and cover that. A steer going to market typically will be processed somewhere in the 11 to 1200 range. That is quite common. Sometimes you get smaller, sometimes you get larger, but we're going to use 1200 as an industry standard. That'll leave you a hanging weight of 750 and a retail cut of 465 in the box in your freezer. Some bone in, some bone out, but that's typically what you might yield from a 1200 pound steer. Now, you say, well, why is that so much less? It seems like a very small amount. The bone structure of the beef is so heavy that a lot of that weight really belongs to that bone structure. Now let's get into it. Let's take what we learned from our cut sheet. Let's take what we learned from our pricing sheet, and let's go into it and let's build what we think our budget's going to be for one of these porks. So again, don't get ahead of me. There's a lot going on up here. I'm going to focus right here on the whole right now, and we're just going to go line by line and figure out what we want to do with this animal. So we spoke earlier, the tenderloin and the chops, it's the same muscle. So I'm going to expect off an animal that size, again, industry average, it's going to be about 25% of what that hanging weight is going to be your tenderloin. Again, these are big muscles that range from one end of the hog to the other, and they're on either side of the spine. So you're looking at roughly 20 pounds a piece for that to happen. So I might say, you know what, I want one tenderloin cut in half, and that's going to be 20 pounds. And then I'm going to turn the other 19 pounds into my boneless chops, because I like to grill up some pork chops from time to time. Again, these are all processed at that 95 cents per pound. Nothing special there, nothing added. and you'll get 19 pounds of chops for $18, and then you'll get 20 pounds of tenderloin for $19, and processed out for $19. Again, I have uh, got these calculations set to automatically do it, and we're rounding up, so there could be some small change here and there that may get missed. But general rule of thumb, trying to be conservative, trying to go with averages. That's what you might look at, and this is processor cost, not animal and processor. This is just processor cost. Uh, I did say I wanted my baby back ribs. That's why I went with boneless chops. So I should expect probably 2 pounds of that. That's going to cost me $1.90 to get those cut out and packaged up. Um, my spare ribs, I did want those. I should probably get roughly 6 pounds of ribs. It's a big animal, so probably about $5.70 for them to cut those out, vacuum seal them, and have them ready for my freezer. The Boston butt and the picnic roast, this is about 32 pounds here. Again, if you're not a pork roast person, a lot of people aren't, unless you're a barbecue person and like to do pulled pork. Um, you know, a lot of folks will turn this into sausage. And so what I've done down here is I'm going to turn all 32 pounds there into breakfast sausage. And if I do that, again, there's 50 cents a pound charge on that. So my total cost for turning that into sausage is going to be $46 for 32 pounds of sausage. That's pretty good. I'm okay with that. Now my pork belly, I don't want any ground pork. For this one, I'm not going to do any Italian sausages. If I wanted to do some links, I could put in 10 pounds at a time here, and let's just say we did that. 10 pounds, that would also be $50 for about 10 pounds there. But quick and easy calculation, it's really not that hard. We take the 95 cents per pound that it costs to process the animal, and then we add the upcharge for the value add service. And again, that link sausage was $4 a pound, so that gives us a total of $4.95 to process that out, get it into the casings, package it up. 4 links per vacuum seal package. Stick a label on it and put it in your freezer. Now, when we come down to the pork belly, we should get roughly 37 pounds of bacon or pork belly from an entire hog. And I know everybody here wishes that we could make an entire hog turn into bacon, but 37 pounds is about what we're going to get. It's roughly 20% of your hanging weight is how you estimate that. So pork belly and bacon are the same thing, except bacon has been smoked and cured, or at minimum cured. So my normal processing, 95 cents per pound. If I kept it at pork belly, I'm not going to do that, so I'm going to turn that to 0, and we're going to keep all 37 pounds in bacon. 99.9% of the population is going to make the same decision. Who doesn't love bacon? And there's never enough bacon to go around. So we're going to turn all of that into bacon. On our hams, we should expect about 39 pounds of ham from an entire pig of the size that we're processing. So if I take a look at that and I say I want those cured, again, 99.9% of the population want those hams cured. I'm going to get 39 pounds of cured ham. That's an awful lot of ham. Most folks will not go through 40 pounds of ham in a year. Now, your family may be different, and there's some other options here. So, again, once that ham is cured, maybe you want that cut into lunch meat. Again, that wasn't on our cut sheet, but if you talk to the processor, I guarantee they have a meat slicer. They might cut that into lunch meat for you and package it up and freeze it, and then you have lunch meat that you can pull out for your kids or for you during the week. And you can have some options once those things are cured and cooked. If you wanted to just get them cured and do that on your own, also a great idea. Good way to take 39 pounds of ham, break it into multiple uses. Some as hams for, say, Easter or Thanksgiving or Christmas. And then a lot of it for your lunch meat. Again, especially those with school-age kids, that's a great option. And then remember, we took that 20 pounds off of the 176, and we're going to just call that 20 pounds of fat. We're hoping that that 20 pounds is meat that can be used somewhere else. But for this purpose, we're being conservative. We're going to call that 20 pounds of fat at 50 cents a pound. And I didn't do my calculation here, but let's run that down. It's $10 for that to happen. All right. Now, if you're doing half a pig, it's the exact same thing, only we cut all of our numbers in half. So instead of 19 pounds of chops, I've got 10. Instead of 20 pounds of tenderloin, I've got 10. If we're looking at, get our bone-in chops there. Somehow I lost that. Ribs, again, I'm only doing half an animal, so I've only got one rib, 1 pound of spare baby backs instead of 6 pounds, 3 pounds of spare ribs, so on and so forth. So what we've done is we've just replicated this exact, the whole hog, cut it in half. This is what the processing is for this breakdown here, and that's just the processing. That's not, your total fees. Again, there were other fees that were on that sheet, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. But that's what you would expect for just the basic processing cost based off of those rates and what we might expect to get from those various cuts. Now, another item, and just to give you a real world example, my buddy Jess, who's also a business partner with me on our agricultural ventures, he's got a big family, lots of kids, and they love their bacon, they love their breakfast sausage, and they can go through it. And he said, you know what? On this animal, I am not going to do any chops, even though we like them. I need as much breakfast sausage as I can get. I need as much bacon as I can get, and I do like my ham. So I'm going to go ahead and get my hams cured, and we'll have those for our holidays, and I'll turn some of that into lunch meat. So for Jess, this is what his looks like. It's a lot of zeros here. He has said, I want this, I want this, I want this. And that's going to come down to about $3.19 in processing charges for those products and those value add products. So again, what does your family need? What do you prefer to eat? This is a great opportunity to experiment with something new. But do what makes sense for you. You can break it down any way you want. So let's talk about pricing. This is the big question. What is it going to cost? What is my all-in cost to buy an animal, have it dropped off, have it processed, have it value-add products, services provided, have it vacuum sealed, boxed, and in my freezer? What's that going to cost me? So if we break this down, again, we have our dispatch fee, which can be split on a half. We have our cured hams came out to about $85.80. Our bacon came out to $109. Again, that was a lot of bacon. Our sausages came out to $46.40. Our fat came out to about $10 for all that fat. 20 pounds, 50 cents a pound. Again, could be more, could be less. Our various cuts that didn't have any additional cost, it was the 95 cents a pound processing, came out to $44.65, and our purchase price was $3.50 times our 252 pound hanging weight. All right, so what we're looking at, you know what? I think we did that different. Yep, 252 hanging weight. All right, making sure. So what that came down to was the purchase price for the animal was $8.82 based off that hanging weight. This was all of our processing cost. I didn't include boxes in here. That's completely optional. That's something to work out with the processor. But on our half, remember there was a split carcass fee. of $15 on that price sheet. So it's the 882 divided by 2 plus 15. And then again, if we did the just cut where we just had hams, bacon, and sausage, this is what it would work out to. Not a whole lot of difference. So your total is going to be 1262.82 for. Let's undo that. Excuse me while I do something I should have done earlier. All right. So 1262.88. Again, numbers or estimates for the entire hog, and that will fill your freezer. For a half hog, you're looking at 631 for all of those cuts. And then for the just cut, 1286 is a little bit higher because a higher percentage of the proteins were turned into sausage, which had a value add, and that added a little bit of cost. But if you break down the amount of meat, and we went off the 175, right? Because you got your pork in there. But the total cost broken down for all those cuts and your pork came down to $7.22 a pound. For just a little bit higher. So $7.22 a pound, pretty fair market rate. And a lot of folks will come up and say, yeah, but I can go to the grocery store, I can go to Walmart, and I can get something cheaper than that. Well, maybe, but we're not talking about bar S bacon here. We're talking about a premium bacon. So if you took, the most expensive bacon you found in your grocery store, that's what you would compare this to. If you took some of the freshest, most well marbled cuts of pork chops or pork loin out of the butcher's counter, not off of the discount rack at the grocery store, that's what you would compare this to. This is a high quality meat. It's not been given any hormones. It's not been given any kind of injections into the meat. There's no water, salt water injected into the meat, which happens quite often at grocery stores. And so a lot of times you're buying water weight. So when you compare quality of product minus the water weight that they're inflating the weight of their products with, this really is not only a comparable price point, but I would say an exceedingly better deal for the quality of meat plus that price that you're getting it at. And again, this is for people that have never purchased a half or a whole animal before, it can be scary. You're like, wow, what am I going to do with all that? That's just a really big number. But you spend this on your groceries, and you spend this on your proteins. If these are things that you're buying at the store, you're paying this much or more annually. I guarantee it. It's just when it comes in smaller amounts, it's much harder to quantify what that is. So let's get into some of the frequently asked questions, and we'll wrap this thing up. So if we go down to, let's get our slideshow back up. Let's talk about some of the other questions I've been asked this week, and I get asked on a regular basis. How much freezer space will I need for an entire hog? Typically, you can get a whole hog in about a 7 cubic foot freezer. These are small chest freezers. You get them at Lowe's and Home Depot. I mean, right now we actually have a deal with Lowe's for the next week. If you needed a freezer, we can get you a 6.9 cubic freezer, I think, for $175 out the door, and we could add that to your bill. Not that we're in the freezer business. We make nothing on that. We just happen to buy a bunch of freezers, and we have that price for the next week. But 7 cubic feet, whole hog, that should get you taken care of. Again, half of that if you're only doing a half a hog, and if you're sharing it with friends and family, even less than that. For those of you that say, well, I only have a fridge and a freezer on top of it or below it, fridge freezer combo, I would say get a freezer. There's a number of reasons why, and I love these chest freezers. They're fairly inexpensive, and if one freezer goes out, you can always transfer things from one freezer to the other. I love them. I have, I think I'm up to 5 chest freezers and an upright. And for the cost of the upright, I could get 4 chest freezers in most of the time, and I can put more in the chest freezers. So I prefer getting multiple small chest freezers versus an upright. And again, limits my risk, limits my loss. If I lose one freezer, I can move things around and save the meat while I'm getting that freezer fixed or replaced. So anyway, that's how much it takes for a full hog. Can I even eat that much meat? And you know what? That was a great question. I know I can eat that much. My family, and I know we ran through a hog very quickly. So I did some googling, and I asked Brother Google, hey, um, what does a family of four? How fast will they go through a whole hog? And it said usually within 3 to 4 months. So conservatively, and that's with just making it a regular part of the diet, not pork every meal. That's just I'm having sausage with breakfast. I'm having at least on the weekends, probably during the week. I'm having pork chops or ribs at least once or twice a month. I'm smoking that pork butt or that picnic roast and doing some pulled pork. It's really easy to go through that amount of food. It sounds like so much, but when it's in your freezer and it's an easy, paid for, and readily available resource to you, you will be surprised at how quickly you go through that. This year, I'm probably going to keep back at least one, 1.5, maybe even 2 hogs. I may keep that back, and I might sell a few cuts off if somebody wants some cuts. But I think that my family, my wife, my son, and I've got my parents close by, and they come over for meals, and I like to throw the meat their way in their freezer, take care of the folks. A good thing to do. Share it with your family. Um, but I think I would probably easily go through 1.5 pigs, maybe two, and I'll definitely go through 2 pigs worth of bacon because again, there's just never enough bacon in the world. Why would anyone buy this much meat? I probably can't count the reasons, but I'm going to list probably the top 4 or 5 that I hear, and you might have your own. First and foremost, the quality of the meat that you get, it's just the best way to buy it. It's the most economical way to buy this quality of meat. The option to have it processed the way that you want is priceless. Um, you can go to the store and buy those cuts, but you're not going to get that quality the way you want it, exactly the way you want it in the number of pork chops in the right package. It's just all the things. It's you're getting it for what you need. It makes your life a lot easier when you do it that way. A lot of folks do it for food security. They want to make sure that they always have food. If bills run a little tight one month, I don't have to worry. I've got food in the freezer. We're taken care of. We don't have to go to the grocery store. Let's just eat out of the freezer and we're fine. And then there's folks that like to entertain, and it's just you never know what you're going to get at the store. If we have another 2020 event or another COVID event or supply chain disruption, again, that food security is huge, and having options so that you don't have to run to the store to figure out what's for dinner. All you've got to do is go to the garage or the shop, open the freezer, and thaw something out. It just once you get used to that lifestyle, you'll never go back. What else might be available? We talked about pork and beef. What else is available? Well, everything. Here on Ford Family Farms, we sell honey, pork, beef. We have a vegetable stand at the end of the road that my wife puts out seasonal vegetables, tomatoes, lettuce, watermelons, whatever may be in season, and it's just an honor system type deal. But there's all kinds of things. We process chickens. We don't typically sell them, but if somebody hit me up and say, "Hey, I want some chickens," I could make some chickens available to you, either whole or broken down. And beef, that goes. We can't produce enough beef already, so it's hard to get on that to get to the top of that list. But if that's something you're interested in, reach out to us. But that's just what we do, right? We also raise goats. We don't typically sell goats to consumers, but if you want a goat, I can make you a deal. But there's producers all over the place that do specialty animals or specialty produce. Anything you want, it starts at a producer level. So uh, go out, do some Google searches, find a producer, call them and ask them. And maybe you've got a producer that you're buying animals from, but you want something else. Say, hey, would you think about doing this? I want a turkey for Thanksgiving. Will you raise me a turkey? Sure. I can tell you from experience, raising turkeys is very costly, and so you're going to pay a lot more for that bird than you will at Walmart. But yeah, there's a lot of people that do that. So reach out, ask your farmers, find out what they do, what they're willing to do for you, and my sincere apologies again. I told you when we get into geek out mode, I can get lost in that spreadsheet. We've been on here for an hour, so I'm going to end this video. But if you have any questions, put them in the comments below. I hope this was helpful, and I hope to hear from you soon. Take care.